From Los Angeles.
Russia, if you're listening.
Talk show. Random, political, outrageous, philosophical, analytical, passionate, hidden sunsets, roadkill cooking tips, open-minded, swordsman, bent, resolute, chocolate, bushwhacker, belt buckles, investigative, companion, fearless. Call in. Piercing the cloud of mainstream entertainment. It's the Cary Harrison Files.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome. We're also live streaming right now on YouTube. You can Google Cary Harrison YouTube. That's C-A-R-Y, Harrison, Cary Harrison YouTube. Subscribe so we can stay connected when you show up at your destination. Switch over to the stream on your phone at the Cary Harrison YouTube channel, which you can also easily find at kpfk.net. That's kpfk.net. Well, it's not even a month, is it? Since you know what? And whose head isn't swimming? Public education, which is what we do here, isn't it? Public education. We get to you what you can't get to on your own. We find things that simply might not be available to you. We bring on the experts that you might not be able to get at your own dinner table and people that know things. And then there's public education. That would be your ability to absorb the information that all of us together using critical thinking are able to gather and muster. And we're going to open up the phones a little later so we can hear your thinking on things that are going on. But public education is critical. It's a grand experiment that dragged this republic kicking and screaming towards something resembling civilization. For 250 years, it's been the great equalizer, wrenching the downtrodden from ignorance, opening doors for women, and even bestowing literacy upon the poor Southern whites who, before Reconstruction, were 5 times as illiterate as their Northern counterparts. The Founding Fathers, those wild-eyed radicals, they knew the truth. They knew that a self-governing people left uneducated would soon find themselves the playthings of tyrants. Madison warned that a democracy without an educated public was little more than a prelude to tragedy. Adams insisted that education must reach out even to the lowest citizen, lest the nation be governed by fools. I'm going to say that again. Lest the nation be governed by fools. Tommy Jefferson, ever the pessimist, predicted that tyranny would happen if the masses remained ignorant. And so before the ink was even dry on the Constitution, Congress enshrined education in law, carving up the frontier into tidy plots where schools would be built by order of the state, no less. Shocking. Absolutely anathema, opposite of everything you've been told in the last month. Then came the Civil War. And with it, the next great push. Honest Abe Lincoln, my ancestor. No stranger to self-education himself, right? He saw literacy as a weapon of freedom. He demanded that Southern states, as they crawled back into the Union, educate their black citizens. The Army, get this, the Army, think about it. Busy with more destructive tasks, usually. The Army took up the cause, marching teachers into occupied territory, securing schoolhouses, and imposing a tax to fund this radical notion. When the war ended, the Freedmen's Bureau carried on the crusade, planting schools across the South, hiring thousands of teachers, and proving, if proof was even needed, that the thirst for knowledge was unquenchable, no matter what plantation owners or politicians believed. And here we are today. By 1867, Congress had enough half-assed assurances, so they actually had to create and did create the Department of Education. Yep, Congress created the Department of Education. Naturally, a lot of people howled in protest, but they were drowned out by men who still had the smoke of war in their nostrils. Education, they declared, was the bedrock of the republic. Without it, liberty was a farce, democracy a tragic joke. The new department would at last ensure that every child, North or South, black or white, had the tools to hold their government to account. Oh, had the tools to hold their government to account. And yet here we are, a century and a half later, still debating the merits of knowledge. The ghosts of ignorance still haunts the halls of power, their owners ever eager to unmake the progress that wiser men bled to build. So let's bring in author and professor Derek Black, who holds the Ernest F. Collins Chair in Constitutional Law at the University of South Carolina Law School, where he directs the university's Constitutional Law Center. Writing recently for Slate, Professor Black lays out this federal presence in education dating back to the country's founding, as well as how Trump is attempting to entirely eliminate the Department of Education. Professor Derek Black, we want to welcome you to the Cary Harrison Files.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Cary. And I should ask if I could use your summary next time I testify before Congress. That was a pretty good summary.
I would be honored. There aren't even words to tell you. I will send it to you as a PDF. I'll have it printed. We can, yes. Let's jump right into it because your expertise is invaluable here. Many of us actually believe, after being told over and over again, that idiocy is the gold standard. While we're flushing immigrants out for being brown, we're bringing in other brown ones from India that can actually help Mr. Musk. All of these ironies are really obvious to many people, maybe not the average person. But let's talk about illiteracy. Once illegal for Black Americans, what does it say about today's book bans, particularly in Florida, where we want to bring back illiteracy, especially for a certain group?
Yeah, I mean, it really is quite striking when you look at the history of Black people's efforts to learn, to read and write, to get access to information, that the South in particular has always been uncomfortable with it, or at least has been uncomfortable with it since the 1820s. And, we've seen ebbs and flows, certainly enormous expansions in education after the Civil War, as you described, enormous expansions during the Civil Rights Movement. But there's always this underbelly that pulls us back, right? That when we get a little bit too much justice, or when Black people make a little bit too much progress, there's something about our American psyche that gets uncomfortable, and we have these moments of retrenchment. And so, of course, today is not the same as 1830, but there is still that emotion that seems to be with us that seems to pull us back towards less knowledge and less equality, unfortunately.
So, Professor Derek Black, who benefits from keeping people uninformed about their own history?
Well, I think the status quo and the power brokers benefit from that. I mean, if we even look back at the South had been resistant to public education, not just for Black people, but for white people as well. So in the 3-4 decades leading up to the Civil War, there really wasn't any public education, so to speak of, in the South. And that's because the plantation owner said, why in the world would I spend money for someone else other than, my own children to be well educated? Why would I empower other people to potentially participate in this government? And so the South in particular, right, had an aristocracy that was able to control and run the South into civil war that would have been much more difficult had there been broader participation by the masses.
Let's talk for a second, Professor Black, about today. People strive. I mean, many of us did. I mean, I had to study in school, and I was punished for being a bad student. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. The teachers were unkind. My parents might have been a little bit, shall we say, disciplinarian if I didn't pull in at least a girthy C+. So now we're told that D- is the new A+ and all of that. It's just not true. You're a professor, so I think you probably have a certain allergy to this kind of underperformance on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, well, we definitely have a lot of grade inflation, but I think part of what's going on in American society is that, which is kind of strange if you think, we have all of this sort of uproar about the NAEP and other test scores now. And the reason why there's so much uproar is not because our students are actually doing so terribly, but because the families actually understand that public education today, just as it was a century ago, is the gateway to a stable life, is the gateway to a better life, right? And rather than trying to double down on the longstanding federal commitment to make those opportunities available for all children, we really see the federal leaders and a lot of state leaders attacking our public education. And somehow or another, the masses are being convinced that this will, accrue to their benefit. But what we really are doing is destroying the institution that has opened up, a chance at a better life for children of all races, all religions, all ethnicities, all socioeconomic statuses. That's what's at stake in this moment.
Well, the founding daddies were clear. They all got that having a bunch of nitwits in a country you're trying to build is not going to get built anything that looks like anything except mess. And here we are, conspicuously, purposely, we have Doge run by Elon Musk, who apparently seems to this is just my assessment, but he seems to feel comfortable in the apartheid South Africa he grew up in, rebuilding that, recapturing it, and taking away the very tools. And I remember my father, inelegant as he was, collecting his German war memorabilia, if you catch my drift, as a Yaley. Therefore, with a martini glass, you're not a Nazi. Yeah, so I've seen this dance before. All that to say, the one moment of wisdom out of probably a handful that I can count was education is a tool they can never take away from you. With it, you can look around corners. You can say, oh, I know what that is. It probably turns out that way. And you can navigate your own future and your own existence by purposely pulling that away from 380 million people. Some of us are lucky enough to have already had exposure to real education, but by wiping out the Department of Education, something that Congress itself thought was not only a great idea, but following the founding fathers' idea that a country full of nitwits is not going to go anywhere fast. By creating a country of nitwits, you can really control them down to the molecule. I mean, that is the only answer I can see if I run it through the Orwell-Huxley filter.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things going on here. First, I want to say that point that you made about never being able to take it away. And so in my book, Dangerous Learning, I really focus on how important as an emotional, as a spiritual element, public education was to the Black community from the 1820s well into the 20th century, because that was the one thing that they said they could never take away from you. And when folks were fleeing right behind Union lines early in the Civil War, they didn't know how that war was going to turn out. They didn't know whether the North was going to win or lose. And if the North won, they didn't know they'd be free, right? I mean, Lincoln was still saying at that point in time, right, that if he could save the Union and keep slavery too, he would do it. He would do it. But those families understood that if they could get education in that moment, that was the one thing that couldn't be taken away, and it could allow all these opportunities and allow to see around corners that you mentioned. And so, I think we need to think about our education system as that. But the other side, right, we're not technically talking about taking education or banning education. What we really see is a phenomenon that we saw in Hungary, right, as its democracy began to erode there in the last decade, which is let's reshape the narratives that children learn. We don't want to stop them from learning. We want to propagandize them, right? We want to build new narratives, right, that sort of line up with what the controlling party or the controlling regime wants. And that's very dangerous. That's not democracy. That's not democratic education. That's the indoctrination that the president claims to be against. An indoctrination that no longer allows free thought, but just requires that people adopt the party line. And that's not the type of country I think most Americans want to live in.
Right. And here you have the Kennedy Center, and we learned shockingly, I'm still clutching my pearls. You can see me clutching them right now. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me clutching my pearls. Go to Cary Harrison YouTube channel. You'll see me clutching my imaginary pearls anyway, probably my nads instead. That apparently there have been thousands of cross-dressers invading the Kennedy Center. So much so that thousands of American families willing to pay $80, $90 of tickets are rushing in with their children to see cross-dressers. It's so horrific. So Donald Trump is going to take over the Kennedy Center because who knows art more than him? Who has more gold toilet seats in such good taste than he? It's just such a burlesque. And this is where education is awesome, is you can actually parody this stuff, because what else are you going to do to deal with it? But you can see it for what it is. The emperor has no clothes and probably ought to go on a diet. We're talking right now to author and professor Derek Black, who holds the Ernest F. Hollings Chair in Constitutional Law at the University of South Carolina Law School, where he directs the university's Constitutional Law Center. He wrote recently for Slate. You want to check it out. It is an exquisite article that breaks down the history of where we come from and why education is critical in our nation. It's not like we live in a special place where education, no, this place exists because we've had education. Professor Black looks at the founding fathers' mandate for education dating back to the country's founding. We're also looking at how Donald Trump is attempting to entirely eliminate the Department of Education for other purposes. Maybe we could speculate, because you and I don't know, maybe you know better, but what would the other purposes be to get rid of the Department of Education?
Well, look, the Department of Education, let's start with this idea that we're going to return education to the states is somewhat silly, because when it comes to questions of curriculum, when it comes to questions of class size, when it comes to questions of teacher qualifications and certifications, when it comes to the details of what they're going to spend their money on, all of that stuff has been and continues to be decided at the state level. So many of the things that people are worried about returning to the states are already there. What really exists in terms of federal control is primarily anti-discrimination, right? It is the federal government that demanded that public schools stop segregating students by race. It is the federal government that demanded that they stop segregating girls by race. It is the federal government that demanded that they open their doors to students with disabilities rather than sending them to alternative facilities. It is the federal government that demanded that U.S. citizens who don't and non-citizens who don't speak English as their first language, that they provide some support. Those are the things that the federal government has asked, demanded and pushed states on. So when we talk about what would be returned to the states, it's really returning those questions to the states. So, I guess that's the motivation, right? That there isn't any federal watchdog on these questions of equality.
And I think we can pretty much guess how that's going to turn out. Much as the abortion issue wasn't federally overturned, you just throw it back to the states. They decide yes or no. A lot of them said no, and there it is. Bob's your uncle. It'd be like gay marriage. They won't try to overturn it. They'll throw it back to the states. They'll say not here. And so you can go to California, and then you can sue California for violating the law in another state that said no. And basically it goes away over time. By getting rid of the Department of Education, which you point out has given women the right to read or to even learn how to do it, along with people of color, along with pretty much anybody with a broken leg. They get to learn too. You throw that back to the states, a state like Florida with Ron DeSantis might say, no, that's okay. Only white kids, there's only enough room in this classroom for white kids with British last names. So that's it. And that way you can probably convince people to cut out everybody else. And it just becomes normalized by the time enough lawyers get in there and challenge it. That's what I worry about. We saw this in Germany, where stuff happened so fast, by the time anyone tried to do recourse, it was already baked into the pie.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I was going to say, you're talking about Germany. You also mentioned the Kennedy Center earlier. And so what you also see happening is this entire sort of silo of information and propaganda. I mean, one of the things that happened in 1840s, when after they had banned Black literacy, after they had banned the Black newspapers, or after they had banned the anti-slavery newspapers, is they couldn't find anything else to ban. So they started looking for ghosts under rocks. And one of my most troubling examples, or laughable examples, was they determined that they needed Southern books by Southern authors for Southern students teaching a Southern way of life, right? And they started reviewing all the textbooks. This is in 1840. And one of the examples in one of the magazines was of a biased book that had to be removed, was a book that devoted disproportionate attention to northern crops. It was a geography book, disproportionate attention to northern crops. This is the basis for removing it from southern schools. And that level of paranoia just continued escalating and escalating, such that the South ate itself. It couldn't even think rationally anymore because it was in such a propaganda chamber. So when we see, for instance, as you point out, taking over the arts, for why, right? It is just propaganda from daylight to dark in which we really can't see straight. And that is a society that can no longer make its way forward as a real democracy.
There's an unintended side effect here, Professor Black, and that would be that you're becoming the new Plato and the new Socrates. We're going to have to protect you, put you in a cave, hide you. It's a weird kind of underground where people that know things, I'm getting very Ray Bradbury here, but if this continues, like, people that hold the flame are not going to be popular with the government. And I imagine that already in the world of academia in which you sit, there are probably signals saying, do less of this, don't do that, we're watching.
Yeah, there's definitely a chilling effect. That's one of the things. The current administration is really talking out both sides of its mouth. On the one hand, it says, let's turn it all back to the states. On the other hand, they say, if you're doing DEI stuff, if you're considering race and diversity, or you're trying to promote inclusion at your school, we're coming to check you out, right? So they're talking out both sides of their mouth. But even closer to home, right? I think it's been about 2 weeks now since the governor of Louisiana called for the removal of a constitutional law professor at LSU. And he was removed, right? He's been bouncing in and out of the classroom over the last week as he battles it out in court. And I'm normally the ever optimistic individual, but I will tell you, it was a very long, soul-searching 24 hours for me when I heard that one of my fellow professors had been removed from the classroom for some commentary he'd made about criminal procedure and the future of this Supreme Court.
We have a question through LinkedIn. We're streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, the whole soup, cat, and pizzas. The question is, this is from David Downing. Please ask Professor Black what role the internet is playing in all of this. It seems that the belief is the new fact, an ominous development that seems perfectly suited for the internet.
Yeah, I think what we're really struggling with is, as humans always do, is grappling with how do we deal with new technologies. In my last book, the previous one, Schoolhouse Burning, I talked about the difficulty that the country faced during Lincoln's time when there was this new technology called the printing press that was shooting newspapers across the country for a penny. And everybody had a newspaper. Everyone had one. There was just thousands of them. And you had all this information. So, I don't have to connect the dots. We've got a lot of that problems with all the apps, no one reads blogs anymore, but all the information on the internet. And so I think we really are grappling with this. In some respects, that information scares us because there's misinformation, but it also scares, people on the far right because there's also justice information in that as well. And so we're going through, I hope, what is just a growing pain so that we'll get to the other side of this. Because the other side of, Lincoln's time was really high quality newspapers like the New York Times, like the Atlantic, and various other sort of state and local newspapers that really did use the power of the printing press to expand knowledge, to expand nuance. I hope that we learn how to harness these new technologies to do the same today, but we're struggling at the moment.
Well, I am thrilled that you're here. Any professor of your caliber is welcome at my dinner table anytime. I promise you that. Let me ask you one more quick question here as we wrap up. In an era where demagogues wrap themselves in the flag while strangling the truth, because you can't do one without doing the other, what is our citizens' duty to fight back now that we understand what the founding fathers' intent was? We've seen it go for the better for many, many decades, and now we're looking for a full reversal. What can we do as citizens?
Well, the one thing that I talk a lot about is public education as a fourth pillar of democracy. When we think about elections, we think about the judiciary, we think about individual rights. Public education is the fourth pillar of our democracy. And look, Americans can disagree about what the tax rate ought to be. They can, disagree about who's supposed to get health care, what a fair price for housing is, and we can flip back and forth with parties on that. But I think we all need to take seriously the role that public education plays. And these aren't just policy debates. These are democracy threats. And we need to protect our public schools. We need to be very careful about sending public dollars to individuals to send their children to private schools that may be counter to the public good.
Yeah, I went to those. It was not there to put warm air into the wings of the public. I can tell you that. It wasn't overtly cynical, but they let us know that it was our job to take the job, to have the job. So I'm in favor of having my neighbors know as much as I do, so that when I'm not looking and my house catches fire, they can actually find the numbers 9 and 1 and 1 on the phone. That's a good thing in the world. I want to thank you so much, author and professor Derek Black, holding the Ernest F. Hollings Chair in Constitutional Law at the University of South Carolina Law School, where he directs the university's Constitutional Law Center. He's written recently for Slate. And Professor, I'm going to jump in and ask you, go ahead and tell us where we can find your book.
Book's available anywhere. I'm not a big Amazon supporter, but I think they can get it to your house in about 24 hours if you're interested. But, we've got a website, derekwblack.com, and that has all my books and links on there. So I invite you to check it out.
Awesome. Recently written also for Slate. You're going to want to check out that article. And we've been looking at the Founding Fathers' mandate for education dating back to the country's founding. We're also have been looking at how the president, the White House, and DOGE is attempting to entirely eliminate, so they say, the Department of Education, what that means to you and what the future could look like with and without it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and I hope you'll come back again.
Be happy to. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Derek Black from the University of South Carolina Law School. We're going to pause, and in just a second, we're going to give a little love to this, your favorite station. When we return, we're going to open up the phones. Yep, we're going to open up the phones. We're live streaming right now on YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube and subscribe so that we can stay connected. And when you show up at your destination, you can simply switch over to the stream on your phone at the Cary Harrison YouTube channel, where you can also easily find us at kpfk.net. That's kpfk.net. Coming up, opening up the phones, exploring together how you feel about civilian billionaire Elon Musk tearing apart 75% of the government we've built over the past 250 years. What do you think that's really all about? And who walks away with the trillions in already earmarked funds sitting in a bucket, ready to be collected? We're going to jump to that in just a sec.
Listen, well, it's still legal. The Cary Harrison Files.
Here's an important message from the U.S. Med Diabetes Solution Center. If you have diabetes, you know the pain of pricking your fingers. But now, by wearing a small device called a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, you can reduce your pain right away. It's easy to use and helps you make more accurate diabetes treatment decisions. So call us right now to see if you qualify for a CGM at little or no cost. U.S. Med. Better service. Better care.
The Cary Harrison Files, reminding you we're also live streaming right now on YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube and subscribe so we can stay connected. When you show up at your destination, switch over to the stream on your phone at the Cary Harrison YouTube channel, which you can also easily find at kpfk.net. I combed my hair. I flossed for you because it's video, and somehow that matters. We're going to open up the phones. We're going to explore together how you feel about civilian billionaire Elon Musk tearing apart 75% of the government we've built over the past 250 years. He says he's going to cancel 50% of all government contracts and leave the other 50%, which happen to be, it's a coincidence, contracts that include him. Whether it's armored Tesla vehicles for the military or scooping up hundreds of billions of dollars in already earmarked funds sitting in a giant bucket meant for government services that no longer exist. What do you think that's really all about? And who walks away with the trillions in already earmarked funds? They don't get put back into the general fund because that's gone bye-bye. It's sitting there, already spent, ready to be collected. What we're really talking about, we're going to go to the phones in a second. All the lines are lit. Can't wait to get you on. What we're really talking about is government by organized crime. A spectacle as old as governance itself, though once upon a time, the crooks had the decency to keep up appearances. But now the masks are off, the velvet gloves discarded, and the goons sit openly at the head of the table, stuffing their pockets while the rubes applaud. You're not one of them, by the way. So what does it look like when gangsters run the state? It looks like contracts handed to cronies, like infrastructure funds vanishing into thin air while roads crumble and bridges sag like old drunks leaning on a lamppost. It looks like justice, not as a blindfolded figure, but as a ledger balanced in favor of those who can pay. It looks like schools that teach nothing, police who serve the highest bidder, and elections that are less a civic duty and more a polite form of armed robbery. When crime runs the show, laws become mere suggestions, written not for the public good, but to legalize the grift. A crime boss in pinstripes learns that it's easier to pass a tax code than to run a protection racket. The money flows faster and nobody asks questions. And these people, some cheer because the thugs speak in their language, loud, crude, and filled with promises of sticking it to the other guy. Others shrug because, after all, hasn't it always been this way? And those who do object, those who dare raise their voices, that would be you, well, they learn quickly that in a system where law and crime are business partners, justice is just another unpaid invoice. And so the machine grinds on, sleek and efficient, rolling over whatever idealists remain. A republic? A democracy? I'm not going to laugh fully because I'm not feeling it's hopeless. But what we have right now is a syndicate with a flag, a cartel with a constitution, and a public so dazzled by the spectacle that they mistake their chains for jewelry. Your Harrison hotlines are open at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Don't forget to press option 1 at 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK to get on the air.
This is the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
I believe we're going to play something here, but let's not.
This station presents What If They Were Alive Today?
December 25th, 6 BC. Jesus Christ is born in Bethlehem. He is one of the greatest historical figures of all time, and millions follow his teachings. But we ask,
What if he were alive today?
So, friends, please give to my ministry. Dig deep into your pockets. Dig until it hurts, and then dig some more. Dig. It's Jesus!
Yeah, it's me. Hey, none of this is what I intended, so I'm gonna have to stop you. Actually, Dad, do you want to do the honors? Bullseye! Nice shot, Dad.
Join us again for another What If They Were Alive Today?
This is the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
This listener has been on hold for so long now they're growing mold. Let's take a phone call.
A great idea. Let's go to Bruce in Los Angeles. Bruce, you're on the Cary Harrison Files.
Hello?
Hey, Bruce.
Yeah. Okay. You cut out for a second. Anyway, I wanted to briefly about Elon. I wanted to give you a brief. I've been reading a book published 1968. It's called The Re-Emergence of Fascism. It's an overview, country by. It's like 20 chapters. Each chapter focuses on the country. In South Africa during World War II, Elon is a descendant of the Boers, the original Dutch settlers in South Africa, right? Go back to the 1600s. During World War II, a majority of the Boer, Afrikaner is a newer term for the Boer people, the Dutch descendants. Elon is a Dutch descendant. A majority during World War II of the Dutch descendant people of South Africa were Hitler supporters. It was a very virulent movement. And I went online and found out that Elon's maternal grandfather, who immigrated to Canada, was part of a Nazi party in Canada during the time. That's all I want to say. Just to a little background to
thank you.
This Nazi salute.
Thank you. That was a perfect contribution. I really appreciate it, Bruce. That opens up a line at 818-985-KPFK, your Harrison hotlines, 818-985-5735. We're going to go to Mark next. Mark, you're on the Cary Harrison Files.
Yeah, I want to say that Musk needs to cloak himself in presidential immunity, especially here in Southern California, where he launches his extremely toxic skyrockets right across LA and Orange counties almost daily. I've seen paper trails. But one of these days, those cheap rockets are going to blow up in a year-round fire zone, and he's going to have to. Well, I did it under presidential authority.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your call very much. That opens up a line at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, your Harrison hotlines. Don't forget, you can catch this right now, live streaming in video on Everything with a Chip and a Signal. You can go to our YouTube channel at Cary Harrison. You can watch it on Instagram, LinkedIn. It really doesn't matter. Make sure you connect, subscribe, and follow so that we can stay connected. In the event somebody pulls some fast ones somewhere, then you're going to be the first to know because we're going to reach out to you. Let's go next to Wayland. You're on the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hi, Cary. I'm calling in because I have some psychic predictions from 30 years ago that on and off I've been posting. That you might find it interesting.
Yes, and I'm glad you said psychic predictions, and that way we can keep the bar maybe not too high. But go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
One of them was World War III will be fought by the U.S. against her allies. Now, this is 30 years ago. This was said, and like I said, I can prove this existed 30 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, because I started sending it out. Future food will be grown in controlled indoor environments. Mexico and Canada will be part of the United States. Mississippi River will flood 3/4 of Texas. They don't say when. And Japan will be no more.
I would love to see that. I imagine you have it typed out old school somewhere with some evidence? Because we do know we have lots of evidence, let's just say, of things that we cannot explain. This kind of stuff is cool. If you want to email that to me, I would certainly love to see it. I appreciate it.
Let me have your address. I'll give it to you. I'll send it to you.
Sure. You can send it to harrison@goharrison.com. Just go to caryharrison.com and use the contact link. I would love to see it. I really appreciate that. You're not far off. The part that makes it difficult is the idea of annexing Canada as if it's just a piece of, land, unmown grass north of us. It's a NATO partner.
I don't know. Okay, I'm not here to explain that. I'm just a messenger.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I thank you for your call, my friend. I hope you have a really great day. Canada, our northern neighbor.
If you insist, okay.
Thank you so much, my friend. We're going to let you go now. Thank you so much. Canada, our northern neighbor, is a NATO partner. which means if there were an effort to truly annex it, former Nazi Germany would have to come in and defend it. Denmark, whose Greenland is also being told that they must surrender, would also be triggered by Article 5 to come in and defend it. So would France and Spain and everywhere else. And so it's just not as easy as it is to say it without stirring up an unbelievable hootenanny. And you can't cancel NATO because you wish to, because guess who has contracts woven in and out through NATO that go for the next 10 years? Our same superhero, Elon Musk. So canceling NATO means canceling so many vendors, defense contractors who've been around for so many years. We're talking trillions of dollars of contracts to go over 10 years. So you can't really make it go bye-bye. So you painted yourself into a corner that is going to work for the constituents. And at the end of the day, we have seen something really good here. We have seen the branches of government still holding up. It took a long time. We were terrified. We saw the Democrats still generally somnambulistic, but beginning to challenge this. We see lawyers rising up all over. We see states attorneys general, 20 different states at this point, maybe more, suing against the destruction, the whole cloth destruction of 250 years of generally sober governance, being ripped apart, being shredded with giant buckets of cash, no longer accounted for, that get to be siphoned and sucked away. So we're seeing the branches of government hold. But remember, and Obama taught us this. Obama, he said, I can do whatever you want. And this is before Obamacare, when he wanted to do it. He said, I can only pull this off with your backing. I can't go in alone and just declare it and think I'm going to have any support. If you make me do it, I can do it. If you make your congressmen, your senators, if you make them do what you want, they can do it. And they will do it. Because if you were a congressman, congresswoman, congressperson, a senator, and you had to come back to your constituents, and there were 10,000 Mildreds lined up on the tarmac, waving canes and awls and axes because of how you were complicit. You were a quisling. You were the Vichy administration with this current administration, and they were just going to beat you to smithereens on the tarmac. Are you going to want to come back to that and have lunch with these people? Hell no. Do you want to keep your gig? Uh-huh. And also, you're a white male. That's what things look like now, which means you have a very sensitive ego. And when someone overreaches and oversteps and makes you suddenly irrelevant, the laws that you've put forward, the bills that you have passed, not that you're a hard worker, but you've passed bills, and somebody in another branch of government says, nope, doesn't exist, you irrelevant, obsolete nobody. They're not going to take that for too much long either. So we're starting to see a response. We've got about 9 minutes left. We're going to pause for just a second, give some love here to KPFK. When we return, we're going to do a quick conversation with Jordan Barab, and he was the OSHA Deputy Assistant Secretary from 2009 to 2017. He's going to give us some insight into what that means and what the future may look like in an organization that protects you from having your arms logged off, your fingers lobbed off, and God knows dozens of other things you didn't even know existed. Why this matters, and we're going to hear it from the horse's mouth himself, that is. We're not talking about Mr. Ed. We're talking about somebody way smarter. We're going to pause for a second, give some love now to KPFK.
This is the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
Everybody wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? You call low-cost airlines. They specialize in cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, cheap car rental rates, and with a best price guarantee. If you want the lowest prices on your airline tickets or other travel services, call now. That's right, call. That's the only way to get these rates. Experts are standing by 24/7 to get you the cheapest airfare and hotel rates available. So don't wait. Call now.
Cary Harrison with you. Don't forget, we are live streaming on our YouTube channel along with LinkedIn and Instagram, everything else. Simply go to our YouTube channel at Cary Harrison. You can just Google Cary Harrison YouTube. It will come up. You can also simply go to kpfk.net, kpfk.net, and watch if you arrive at your destination or get all of the archives. Please subscribe and follow so that we can stay in touch, because when things happen, and we often hear about it weeks before they unfold, we can let you know. Also, you can get our free newsletter if you go to caryharrison.com, caryharrison.com. You'll get a copy of this show, all the archives and transcripts at caryharrison.com. Let's jump right now to Jordan Barab. He was the OSHA Deputy Assistant Secretary from 2009 to 2017, and he writes Confined Space. It's a newsletter about workplace safety and labor, but it goes deeper because he is talking about all the different things that OSHA actually does, which is more than your elbow gets scraped and you file a report. I want to thank you, and thank you for joining us during this pledge drive here, Jordan Barab. Thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about why OSHA matters.
Yeah, thanks, Cary. Good to be here. So over 100 workers are killed every week on the job. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen workers crushed to death in a trench collapse, dragged into a wood chipper and decapitated. It's a dangerous world out there, and OSHA is it's an important agency. It tries to guarantee that every worker has a safe workplace, but it's an incredibly small and underfunded agency that can only get to every workplace in the country once every 185 years. So it's very vulnerable to this administration, and I should say workers are very vulnerable to this administration that's looking to cut these government agencies everywhere they can.
And Jordan Barab, OSHA does way more than just that part. It has access to and distributes information about that affects everybody, whether they work or not, pretty much.
Yeah, OSHA has an enormous number, in addition to enforcement that it does. It does a lot of compliance assistance and training. Has an enormous number of publications on its website. Unfortunately, what we've seen is a number of those publications now being banned. Essentially, we're seeing a book burning at the Department of Labor because they may contain the word diverse, or they may, talk about, differences between workers. It's a problem because, again, both employers and workers depend on this information for critical instructions on how to protect workers in the workplace.
So when we get to diversity, equity, inclusion, if you are against equity, I mean, nobody ever actually talks about this, but if you're against DEI, you're against other people, you're against equality, which is enshrined in the Constitution, and inclusion. So in other words, you're against everything the Constitution stands for, and isn't that elegant and noble? I mean, this is cuckoo.
It's cuckoo, and it's just taking down, publications because they have this word diverse in it, even though it's totally out of context. I mean, they've taken down publications that deal with ergonomics. They've taken down publications that deal with construction safety and personal protective equipment because they mention in there that, women are not just smaller versions of men. They actually are shaped differently, and you have to make sure the personal protective equipment and life-protecting respirators actually fit all types of people who may need them. So it's just nuts. It's crazy what they're doing, and it will have real harm for workers. It'll mean more workers are getting injured, more workers are getting sick, and more workers are getting killed.
So quick question here. What's the payoff? What's the upside? Who wants this to happen and why? Speculate for us.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what's been happening at OSHA, I think, is all the employees there, good staff there are terrified because they're seeing what's happening, and they're seeing all the workers getting fired at USAID allegedly for insubordination. So I think they're going, way overboard there. So, I think they're starting to put a few of them back up. So maybe they're starting to get embarrassed. Congressman Bobby Scott and Ilhan Omar have sent a letter over there demanding answers as to why these publications were taken down and why they're demanding that the written versions be discarded. It's pretty ridiculous, and it's not good for workers in this country.
We're up against the wall, but I'm very grateful you've joined us today, my friend. I wish we had more time. I want to bring you back on as things continue to unfold.
All right.
Jordan Barab, am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
No, it's Barab, but that's close enough.
Jordan Barab. You can just Google Confined Space. It's a newsletter about workplace safety and labor and all this other stuff. Please check it out. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. Don't forget, you can get our free newsletter at caryharrison.com. Very much looking forward to seeing you next week. And just keep it hopeful, because trust me, if we want it, we can get it. I'll see you next time.
Uncensored, unexpurgated, and unapologetic. It's the Cary Harrison Files.